The cafe on Harbor Street was the kind of place people came to disappear for a while. Fishermen after long nights at sea. Old couples who'd been visiting the same corner booth for decades. And tourists who stopped in for coffee with a view of the Pacific. Every morning, just after 7, Alyssa Carter sat at the table near the window. A steaming mug of black coffee in front of her, and a worn paperback open beside it. She looked ordinary enough, maybe mid-30s. Short chestnut hair, sun-tanned skin, athletic posture, but modestly dressed. She spoke softly to the waitress, always tipped generously, and seemed to carry an air of calm that made people instinctively lower their voices around her. There was something unexplainable about her presence, not intimidating, but quietly commanding. Nobody in the town of Crescent Bay knew much about her. She had arrived 2 years ago, rented a small cottage near the shore, and never talked about her past. Some said she was a writer seeking inspiration. Others believed she had lost someone and moved to the coast to start over. Whatever the truth, Alyssa blended into the rhythm of the town perfectly, the type of person who drew no attention, yet was noticed by everyone. What they didn't know, what no one in Crescent Bay suspected, was that Alyssa once carried the rank of lieutenant in the United States Navy SEALs, the elite Special Operations Force. Almost no one believed a woman could endure. She had not only endured, she had excelled. Her name was whispered in certain circles as the woman who had broken limits, rewritten rules, and survived missions that would freeze the blood of seasoned soldiers. But that was another life, one she buried with the flag-draped coffin of her best friend, Petty Officer Marcus Hawley, years ago. After Marcus's death during a mission in Afghanistan, Alyssa had walked away. She told her commanding officer she was done fighting battles that didn't end, turned in her uniform, and disappeared. She found Crescent Bay by accident, a quiet coastal town that asked no questions and offered silence in return. For a long time, silence was enough. That morning, the sunlight danced across the water as gulls wheeled overhead. Alyssa stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, her gaze distant. She could still hear the faint hum of helicopter, blades in her dreams sometimes, still feel the grit of sand and sweat on her skin. The war might have ended for her on paper, but pieces of it still clung to her soul like invisible scars. She had come to this cafe daily, not for the coffee, but for the ritual, the predictability that kept her anchored. She liked the warmth of the mug against her hands, the familiar chatter of regulars, the creak of the wooden floorboards. Small things reminded her that she was home, safe, grounded in the normalcy she had once thought she'd never feel again. Then the door opened. 3 young men swaggered in, loud laughter cutting through the quiet. Derek, tall and broad-shouldered with a permanent smirk. Chase, wiry and restless, chewing gum like it owed him money. And Milo, the youngest, always trying to prove himself tougher than he was. They were local troublemakers, not truly dangerous, but reckless and bored. They made the cafe their hangout, always looking for someone weaker to tease, something to disrupt. The waitress, Emma, approached nervously. "Morning, boys." "What'll it be?" "3 coffees," Derek said with exaggerated charm. "Extra sugar for our sweet personalities." He winked, and his friends burst out laughing. Emma forced a polite smile and hurried away. Alyssa didn't even look up. She had seen men like this before, young, insecure, desperate for validation. She knew their type better than they knew themselves. "Hey," Chase whispered, glancing toward her. "Who's that chick who always sits alone?" "She's here every damn day." "Probably some sad lady waiting for her sailor to come back," Derek chuckled. "Look at her, all serious and mysterious. Thinks she's better than everyone." Alyssa turned a page, unmoved. "Maybe she just needs company," Milo added with a grin. "Wanna go ask her?" "Nah," Derek said. "Let's have a little fun first." When Emma returned with their coffees, Derek accidentally brushed her hand. She pulled away, uncomfortable. "Come on, sweetheart," he said mockingly. "Don't be shy. You smiled at that guy earlier. I just want equal treatment." "Please," she said, her voice tight. "Just enjoy your coffee." Elisa's eyes rose from her book, cold and precise. She didn't speak, but the stillness in her body changed, like a storm pausing before lightning. Derek noticed her gaze and frowned. "What?" he snapped. "Got something to say, lady?" Elisa's expression didn't waver. "You should sit down," she said simply. Her tone was calm, but it carried a quiet authority that made the air feel heavier. Chase smirked. "You telling us what to do?" "No," Elisa replied. "I'm warning you." The cafe went silent. Even Emma froze, unsure what to do. Derek laughed, trying to hide his unease. "Whatever, lady. We're just having fun. Don't get all heroic on me." But there was something in Elisa's eyes, something steady, ancient, unflinching. It was the look of someone who had stared down gunfire and didn't flinch. Derek's smirk faltered. "Come on, let's go," he muttered, breaking the tension. The trio grabbed their coffees and left, muttering insults under their breath. Elisa exhaled softly and returned to her book. Emma came over, still shaken. "Thank you," she whispered. "They've been like that for weeks." "Don't thank me," Elisa said gently. "Just don't let them see fear. That's what they feed on." Emma nodded slowly, realizing Elisa wasn't just giving advice. She was speaking from experience. Outside, Derek kicked a pebble across the road. "Can you believe that woman? Acting like some kind of soldier or something." Chase snorted. "Yeah, man, who does she think she is?" But Milo hesitated. "Did you see her eyes, though?" She wasn't scared. Not even a little. Derek rolled his shoulders, unwilling to admit the truth. He had seen that same look before, once when he tried to pick a fight with an off-duty cop. It was the look of someone who didn't need to prove anything because they already knew they could win. Still, pride burned hotter than caution. "She wants to act tough," Derek said. "We'll show her how it feels to get pushed around." That night, Elisa sat on her porch, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. She could still feel the tension from earlier, the moment where instinct almost took over. Years of discipline had taught her restraint, but some lines were hard to ignore. She didn't know the boys' names, and she didn't care. But she could sense it. Trouble rarely ended in one encounter. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was an old contact, Commander Tate, her former CO. She hadn't spoken to him years. The message was short. "Heard you're living quietly. Hope you found peace, Carter. You earned it." Elisa smiled faintly. "Trying to," she murmured to herself, typing back. "Still working on it, sir." The ocean breeze swept through her hair. Somewhere in town, laughter echoed, loud, reckless, familiar. She closed her eyes, feeling the shift in the air. Peace was fragile, and she had a sinking feeling that, come tomorrow, she'd be forced to remember everything she'd tried so hard to forget. Morning came wrapped in fog and salt air. The harbor was quiet, except for the clinking of boat chains and the faint squawk of seagulls circling above. Elisa Carter liked mornings like this, when the town was still half asleep and the world hadn't yet remembered its noise. She finished her run along the coastline, the rhythmic slap of her sneakers on wet sand echoing her breathing. Running wasn't exercise for her. It was meditation. Every mile carried away a fragment of the past, one she still wasn't sure she could forgive herself for surviving. By the time she reached the cafe, the fog was thinning, revealing the morning crowd. Emma, the waitress, waved cheerfully. "You're early today." Elisa nodded, offering a small smile. The ocean didn't let me sleep in. Emma laughed, setting down Alyssa's usual order before she even asked. Black coffee, oatmeal with honey, and a slice of toast. They had fallen into this wordless ritual months ago. Alyssa liked that Emma never pressed her with questions, and Emma liked that Alyssa always tipped more than anyone else in town. It was their unspoken friendship, gentle, simple, and perfectly balanced. Alyssa sat by the window as sunlight poured across the water, and for a brief moment, she felt almost normal. But across the street, 3 shadows moved, familiar shapes framed by arrogance. Derek, Chase, and Milo. They sauntered into the cafe like they owned the place, shoulders swinging, loud and brash. Emma's smile faltered the moment she saw them. She quickly grabbed menus and approached, her cheerful tone cracking slightly. "Morning, boys." "Same as usual?" "Sure," Derek said, leaning on the counter. "But maybe this time you join us for breakfast, huh?" Emma's lips tightened. "You know I can't do that." "Aw, come on," Chase chimed in. "Don't be so cold. We're nice guys." "Nice?" Emma muttered under her breath, moving away. Elisa's gaze lifted briefly from her oatmeal. She didn't like interfering in people's lives, but she noticed things others missed. The tremor in Emma's hands as she poured coffee. The way Derek's grin widened when he realized she was uncomfortable. The edge in Chase's tone as he mocked her behind her back. Predators always revealed themselves in subtle ways. The trio sat a few tables away from Alyssa. Derek leaned back in his chair, sipping coffee with exaggerated casualness. "Look who's here again," he said quietly, nodding toward Alyssa. "The mysterious book lady." Chase grinned. "Man, she's always alone. Doesn't talk to anyone but the waitress. Probably one of those stay away from me types. Or maybe she thinks she's too good for this town?" Derek sneered. "Probably one of those big city women who think small town folks are beneath them." Milo frowned slightly. "She doesn't look stuck up to me. Just quiet." "Quiet means hiding something," Derek said with mock seriousness. "And people who hide things, they're either criminals or heartbreakers." Chase laughed. "Or both." Alyssa took a slow sip of her coffee. She could hear every word. Of course, SEAL training had fine-tuned her awareness far beyond normal limits. She didn't react, didn't even blink. But her mind cataloged the details, their posture, their tone, their rising intoxication with their own cruelty. They weren't threats. Not yet. But arrogance was a slippery slope. When Emma brought their plates, Derek reached out and caught her wrist lightly. "You really should smile more. You're pretty when you do." Emma froze. "Please let go." "Oh, come on, don't be like that." That's when Alyssa looked up. Her eyes met Derek's, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. There was no expression on her face, no anger, no visible emotion, just an intensity so sharp it sliced through the noise like a blade. Derek's laughter faltered. He blinked, as though realizing suddenly that he was standing on a thin sheet of ice. Emma gently pulled her hand free and stepped back. Derek forced a chuckle, trying to regain control. "What are you staring at, lady?" Alyssa's voice was quiet, but it carried across the cafe with unsettling clarity. "You should sit down." The tone wasn't confrontational. It was command, disguised as suggestion. Derek opened his mouth to say something, but found no words. Chase shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. "What? You think you can tell us what to do?" Chase said, puffing up his chest. "No," Alyssa replied evenly. "I'm just giving you the chance to make a better choice." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Even the hum of the coffee machine seemed to fade. Derek's smirk cracked. He grabbed his plate and sat down, muttering under his breath. Emma turned to Alyssa, gratitude in her eyes. Alyssa simply nodded once, Nothing more needed to be said. The tension lingered long after the trio left. Conversations in the cafe were quieter, cautious. A few customers approached Alyssa afterward, curious, but she waved off their questions. "Just a misunderstanding?" she said softly. "That's all." But Emma knew better. Later, as Alyssa prepared to leave, Emma followed her outside. "They're not going to let it go," she warned. "They hang out near the pier most nights. They drink, they fight. I've seen them scare tourists." Alyssa adjusted her jacket, glancing at the horizon. "Then they're the kind of men who'll eventually learn what fear feels like." Emma hesitated. "You talk like you've seen this before." "I have," Alyssa said quietly. "Too many times." Then she smiled, not warmly, but knowingly, and walked away. That evening, Derek and his friends gathered at the pier. Bottles clinked, and their laughter echoed over the water. But beneath the jokes, something simmered. "You see her face when she told us to sit down?" Chase scoffed. "Like she's some kind of boss." Derek clenched his jaw. "I don't like being told what to do, especially not by some woman who thinks she can stare me down." "She looked like she meant it, though," Milo said hesitantly. "Like she wasn't scared of anything." "That's what makes it worse," Derek snapped. "She made me look weak in front of everyone." "You think people aren't going to talk about that? The waitress? The regulars?" "Nah, man, I'm not letting that slide." Chase grinned wickedly. "What are you going to do? Pick another fight in broad daylight?" Derek shook his head slowly, eyes narrowing. "No, something quieter. Something that reminds her she's not the only one who can intimidate." The night grew darker, the tide creeping higher against the pier. They didn't notice the fisherman nearby shaking his head, muttering, "Those boys are about to mess with the wrong kind of quiet." Meanwhile, Alyssa sat on her porch again, the glow from a single lamp soft against her face. She cleaned the small pocket knife, not because she needed it, but because the act was soothing. The blade caught the light, reflecting flashes of old memories. A dusty base camp, the sound of Marcus's laughter, the thump of a helicopter overhead. The way he'd said before their last mission, "You'll always have a choice. Alyssa, fight or forgive." She had chosen forgiveness once. It hadn't saved him. When the breeze shifted, she looked toward the ocean and frowned. Something in her gut told her trouble was coming. That old sixth sense trained from years of surviving ambushes and traps. She didn't know when, but she knew the moment was close. She whispered to the wind, as if speaking to Marcus himself. Guess peace was never meant to last long. The next day, the cafe felt normal again, almost too normal. Derek and his friends were nowhere to be seen, and the morning passed quietly. Alyssa pretended not to notice the lingering looks from other customers, whispers that faded whenever she turned her head. She finished her coffee, thanked Emma, and left without another word. Outside, the sunlight was bright and sharp. She tucked her hands in her pockets and headed toward the pier, unaware that 3 sets of eyes were already watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. They thought they were the hunters. They had no idea what kind of prey they'd chosen. The sky was a painted bruise of purple and gold as the sun bled into the horizon. The last of the fishing boats drifted back into the harbor, their engines murmuring softly. The pier stretched long and empty, save for the echo of footsteps and the smell of salt on the air. Alyssa Carter walked its length as she did every evening, hands in her jacket pockets, gaze fixed on the water, letting the rhythmic crash of the waves dull the noise in her head. It was her way of cleansing the day. No thoughts of the past, no memories of war, just the ocean's endless heartbeat and the quiet promise of peace. But peace had already left Crescent Bay. At the far end of the pier, half hidden behind a row of stacked crates, 3 silhouettes huddled, whispering, laughing, fueled by the reckless energy of cheap whiskey and wounded pride. Derek, Chase, and Milo had been there for an hour, passing a flask between them and replaying yesterday's scene in the cafe like a bad movie they couldn't stop watching. "She made you look stupid, man," Chase said, grinning. "Like, completely shut you down." Derek scowled, taking a swig. "I know what she did. That's why we're here. You think I'm gonna let some random woman embarrass me in front of half the town? Not a chance." Milo shifted uneasily. "We're not seriously gonna... What, jump her or something?" Derek smirked. "We're just gonna remind her that respect goes both ways." Chase laughed. "Yeah, a little shove, a little scare. She'll think twice before giving us that death stare again." Milo hesitated. He was the youngest, barely 21, and this was the first time his gut told him something wasn't right. But Derek's confidence was intoxicating. He wanted to belong, to seem fearless. So he said nothing. They watched as Alyssa approached, her figure steady, calm, outlined by the fading light. She didn't see them, or maybe she did and didn't care. Her steps were even, her pace unhurried. "Now," Derek whispered. He moved first, quiet, but not quiet enough for a Navy SEAL. Alyssa heard the scuff of a boot on the planks, the slight hitch in breathing, the clinking of metal against wood. She didn't turn around. Not yet. Then it happened. A hard shove between her shoulders. The force sent her stumbling toward the railing, her palms slamming against the cold metal edge. The sound echoed, sharp and final. Chase laughed. "Whoa, careful there. Don't want you falling in." Alyssa froze for one long second, staring down at the water below, dark, endless, indifferent. Then she straightened slowly, her movements controlled, precise. When she turned, the laughter stopped. Her eyes were no longer soft. They were steel. Derek blinked, suddenly sober. "Hey, relax, lady. We were just kidding around." Alyssa said nothing. She took a slow step forward. The planks creaked beneath her boots. The wind shifted, carrying a hint of storm. Milo took a step back instinctively. Derek?" But Derek was trapped between bravado and the first prick of fear. "You think you can scare me with that look?" He snapped, forcing a laugh. "You're not special. You're just some..." He didn't finish the sentence. Alyssa moved. It wasn't a lunge or a charge. It was fluid, deliberate, almost beautiful in its precision. In one swift motion, she caught Derek's wrist and twisted. The crack of joints filled the air, followed by his strangled yelp. Before Chase could react, she pivoted, using Derek's weight to throw him forward, his body hitting the pier with a thud. "Holy," Chase started, reaching for her. She sidestepped, grabbed his elbow, and redirected his own momentum, sending him stumbling into Milo. Both hit the wooden planks hard, groaning. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds. When Derek tried to rise, she placed a boot on his shoulder, pressing down just enough to keep him pinned. "Never push someone from behind," she said, voice calm, steady as stone. "Unless you're ready for what comes next." Her words weren't shouted. They were whispered, yet every syllable carried weight. Milo stared up at her, wide-eyed. Who are you?" Alyssa met his gaze for a brief moment. "Someone who's done being pushed." Then she stepped back, removing her boot from Derek's shoulder. "Get up, all of you." The men scrambled awkwardly to their feet, clutching bruised arms and wounded pride. Chase opened his mouth to speak, but Alyssa cut him off with a look. "You've had your fun. Go home before I change my mind about letting you walk away." Her voice wasn't angry. It was controlled, almost clinical. That was what made it terrifying. They backed away, muttering apologies that dissolved into the wind. As they disappeared down the pier, Alyssa exhaled, the tension leaving her body like smoke. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from restraint. It would have been easy to hurt them badly. Too easy. Years of combat conditioning had trained her to react, not to hesitate. But tonight, she'd chosen to stop. That choice, though, didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into everything she thought she'd left behind. She turned toward the water again. The surface rippled with reflected light from the pier lamps, peaceful and uncaring. "You almost lost it," she whispered to herself. "You can't be that person anymore." But deep down, she knew that person wasn't gone, just buried. Meanwhile, Derek limped down Main Street, rage simmering beneath humiliation. What the hell was that? He hissed, holding his sore wrist. She's crazy. "She's trained," Milo said quietly. "Didn't you see how she moved? That wasn't luck. Trained?" Chase spat. "She's some psycho, that's what. Probably ex-military or something. Nobody moves like that, unless they've... You know." He mimed the gun with his hand. Derek's eyes narrowed. Ex-military. He remembered her posture, the way she stood balanced on the balls of her feet, how her hands were always free. It clicked. "You think she was a soldier?" "Maybe," Milo muttered. "Maybe more than that." Derek looked back toward the pier, his ego torn between fear and defiance. "Doesn't matter what she was. Nobody humiliates me like that." Milo stopped walking. "You already lost once. Walk away, Derek." But Derek didn't hear him, or didn't want to. He was too busy replaying her words. Never push someone from behind unless you're ready for what comes next. He clenched his fists. "Fine, then let's find out what comes next." Elisa walked home under the pale light of the moon. The air smelled of salt and rain. Her mind was quiet, but her heart wasn't. Memories surged unbidden, the screams in the desert, the flash of muzzle fire, Marcus's hand slipping from hers. She had sworn to never fight again. But fighting had a way of finding her. When she reached her cottage, she stood at the door for a long time before going in. Her reflection in the window looked different. Not the peaceful woman she'd tried to become, but the soldier she'd buried. She didn't like that reflection, but she couldn't deny it either. "Old habits," she murmured, locking the door behind her. "They don't die. They wait." Hours later, a storm rolled in. Rain pounded against the windows, and thunder cracked above the waves. In town, 3 young men huddled in a garage, plotting foolish revenge. On the edge of the coast, a woman who had fought real wars sat alone, unaware that her calm was about to be tested again. The pier, the town, the sea, all of it waited in silence. Because everyone knew, even without words, that this wasn't over. It had only begun. The storm that night felt like the ocean had come alive to wash the sins off Crescent Bay. Rain lashed against the rooftops. Thunder rolled like distant artillery, and the streets glistened under the pale light of flickering lamps. Alyssa sat by the window, watching a lightning paint brief flashes across the water. Each flash felt like a memory unwanted, vivid, and sharp as broken glass. She had spent years trying to unlearn the instinct to prepare for attack, to stop hearing threats in every sound. But as the storm howled outside, something inside her stirred again, the quiet, disciplined hum of awareness that never really went away. The Navy SEAL in her was waking up. She rubbed her hands together, noticing the faint tremor that hadn't faded since the incident on the pier. It wasn't fear, it was energy. Adrenaline. A switch she had kept off for too long was beginning to flip. Then came the sound. 3 knocks on her door. Elisa froze. At 11:47 p.m., nobody visited without reason. She rose slowly, moving through the darkened living room like a shadow. The lightning flared again, and she saw their shapes through the frosted glass window of the door, 3 figures, soaked and restless. Her jaw tightened. "Go away," she called. "Open up." Derek's voice came through the storm, rough and slurred. "We just want to talk." Elisa said nothing. She watched their outlines sway, shoulders hunched. She counted their movements, the way Chase shifted weight from foot to foot, the way Milo kept glancing behind him, like he already regretted being there. When no answer came, Derek banged harder. "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it? Come out here, Navy lady." That word Navy hit her like a bullet. They'd figured it out. She took 1 step back from the door. Calmly, she turned the lock, not to open it, but to secure it. Then she reached under the table, pulled open a drawer, and took out the small flashlight and the old military knife she hadn't touched in years. She wasn't going to fight. Not unless she had to. But she would be ready. Outside, Derek was boiling with frustration. "She's hiding," he spat. "She's scared now." Milo shook his head. "She's not scared, Derek. You saw what she did to us. We should leave." Before what? She calls the cops? Let her. Derek took a step back and kicked the door hard. The wood splintered but held. "Come on. You gonna hide all night?" The storm muffled most of his words, but inside, Alyssa heard every syllable. She wasn't afraid, but she was disappointed. These weren't enemies. They were kids playing with fire, too arrogant to realize the blaze they'd started. She exhaled slowly. Her training whispered the checklist in her mind. Control your breathing, control your fear, control the environment. A second kick. A louder crack. Her eyes flicked toward the back of the house. The kitchen door. The emergency exit she always kept clear. She could leave. Walk away. Call Sheriff Hayes and be done with this. But walking away never fixed rotted, only let it spread. Lightning split the sky. The doorframe finally gave in, and Derek stumbled forward into her living room, soaked and panting, Chase right behind him. Milo stayed outside, paralyzed. "Where are you?" Derek snarled, eyes darting around the dim room. "You think you can?" The flashlight beam hit him square in the face. For a second, the white glare blinded him. Then the light shifted, and she stepped into view. Alyssa stood there in a plain black t-shirt, her knife glinting in the pale light, not raised, but ready. Her posture was still, her breathing slow. "You have 5 seconds, she said quietly. "To leave." Derek laughed, though his voice cracked. "Or what? You gonna stab me?" She didn't answer. The silence itself was the answer. Chase shifted nervously. "Man, let's just go." But Derek, drunk on pride, lunged forward. She didn't step back. Instead, she sidestepped his charge, hooked his leg with her boot, and sent him crashing to the floor. In the same motion, she caught Chase's arm and twisted it upward until he yelped. The knife never even moved. It just rested at her side as she controlled both men with nothing but precision and discipline. Milo finally rushed in, trying to pull Derek up, but Alyssa's voice stopped him cold. "Stay where you are." He froze. "Do you have any idea," she said, her voice low and sharp, "what it's like to fight for people who think power means hurting someone weaker? You boys want to play soldier? Fine, but you don't get to do it in my home." Derek groaned, face pressed against the wood. "You're insane." "I'm alive," she said flatly. "And you're lucky you still are." The knife clattered to the table as she stepped back. Her breathing slowed again. She had full control now, not just of them, but of herself. "Get out," she ordered. "And if you ever come near me or anyone else like me again, I'll make sure the next lesson you learn comes with handcuffs and headlines." Chase didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled up, pulling Derek by the arm. Milo followed, eyes down. None of them said a word as they ran into the rain, disappearing into the night like scared children. When they were gone, Alyssa locked the door again, pressed her back against it, and let the weight of the moment sink in. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a hollow ache. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from restraint. She had walked the razor's edge between defense and destruction, and somehow managed not to fall. But deep down, she knew something else. They wouldn't stop. Not yet. By morning, Crescent Bay was quiet again. The storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean, as if nothing had happened. But rumors began to spread like oil on water. People whispered about the incident on the pier, about 3 boys who picked the wrong woman to mess with. Some said she was a martial artist. Others claimed she was ex-special forces. Nobody knew the truth, but everyone agreed on one thing. Derek and his friends had it coming. At the diner, Sheriff Hayes stirred his coffee, listening. When Alyssa walked in later that morning, his eyes met hers. No words were needed. He knew something had gone down. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," she said. "You sure?" She hesitated. "They came to my house." His jaw tightened. "Names?" She shook her head. "I handled it." He leaned forward. "Alyssa, handling it your way isn't the same as letting the law handle it." "I didn't hurt them," she replied. "I just stopped them." Hayes sighed. "You know, I respect what you did over there. But this isn't war anymore." Her gaze was distant. "Maybe it never stopped being war, Sheriff. Some battles just change uniforms." That night, Alyssa stood on the pier again, watching the calm waves return. The sea always had a way of resetting itself after chaos. She envied that. A voice came from behind her, soft, hesitant. "Miss Carter?" She turned. It was Milo alone, his head bowed, hands shoved in his pockets. "What do you want?" she asked evenly. He looked at her, shame flickering in his eyes. "To say I'm sorry. For all of it. I tried to stop them." "I didn't want." "I know," she interrupted. "You walked away when they didn't." He nodded. "They're talking about coming back again. Derek's mad. He says you made him look weak." Elisa's expression hardened. "Tell Derek he doesn't know what weak looks like yet." Milo swallowed. "If he does something stupid again, he's gonna get hurt." She looked out at the water. Then maybe that's the only way he'll learn. As Milo left, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint scent of rain. Alyssa stayed on the pier, her reflection wavering on the black surface below. For the first time in a long while, she realized something terrifying. The switch inside her, the one she'd fought to keep off, was on again. And if they pushed her one more time, there would be no turning it back off. The morning after Milo's warning, Crescent Bay seemed almost too quiet. The gulls wheeled lazily overhead, the waves lapped gently against the shore, and sunlight danced across the water like nothing dark had ever touched it. But inside Alyssa Carter's chest, a different tide churned. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Years of combat had taught her to read silence like a map, and this silence felt wrong. It was the kind that came before the storm, not after it. Alyssa's life since returning from the Navy had been a steady climb toward peace. The ocean, her morning runs, the small circle of locals who respected her boundaries, they were her therapy. But the past few days had cracked that fragile calm. Every step she took, she caught herself scanning corners, checking reflections, measuring distances between herself and strangers. It was muscle memory, the kind she'd hoped was long gone. And deep down, She hated the three reckless men had brought it back. Sheriff Hayes found her near the marina, checking the lines of a docked boat. "You didn't sleep," he said by way of greeting. She didn't turn. "You sound like my old CO. Guess that's a compliment," he said with a half-smile. "Listen, I got reports. Those boys, Derek, Chase, and Milo, they've been seen hanging around the scrapyard outside town. Word is they're looking for something that doesn't belong to them." "You mean trouble," she said. "Exactly." He hesitated. "I know you can handle yourself, Alyssa. But if they come near you again, don't handle it alone. Call me." "I did call you," she said quietly. "By staying out of jail." He chuckled dryly, but the concern didn't fade from his eyes. "You know what I mean." She nodded, but in her mind, the decision was already made. If they came again, there wouldn't be warnings or restraint this time. The line had been drawn. That afternoon, Derek stood outside the scrapyard, staring at the old pickup Milo had borrowed. His wrist was still sore from the night before, a constant reminder of how Alyssa had humiliated him. He replayed the moment she'd pinned him, the sound of her calm voice, the way she looked at him like he wasn't even a threat. "She thinks she's better than us," he muttered. Chase kicked a can. "She is better than us, man. You saw what she did." "Shut up," Derek snapped. "She's not some superhero. She just caught us off guard." Milo said nothing. He was done with this, but fear kept him tethered. Derek had that kind of dangerous charm that made walking away feel impossible, until it was too late. "So what's the plan?" Chase asked. Derek smirked. "We remind her that Crescent Bay doesn't belong to her. I heard she runs every morning by the cliffs. We wait there. No one'll see a thing." Milo's stomach sank. "That's crazy, man. You're talking about ambushing her." Derek's grin turned feral. "Call it payback." He turned and opened the truck door, rain beginning to sprinkle from a gray sky. "You in or not?" Chase hesitated only a second before climbing in. Milo lingered, heart pounding. He thought of Alyssa's steady eyes, the way she'd spared them when she didn't have to. He knew this wasn't a fight anymore. It was a disaster waiting to happen. He made his choice. "I'm out," he said, backing away. "Do what you want, but I'm done." Derek glared. "You walk away now. Don't ever show your face again." "Fine by me," Milo said, and turned into the rain. The cliffs were silent, except for the ocean crashing below. Alyssa jogged along the trail, the wind whipping through her hair. The air was damp, the scent of pine and salt thick around her. She didn't know she was being watched. Derek and Chase crouched behind the rocks near the trail's bend, soaked and shaking from both cold and nerves. Derek clutched a length of metal pipe he'd pulled from the truck, a coward's weapon. "There she is," Chase whispered. Derek's pulse raced. "On my mark." When Alyssa rounded the corner, Derek stepped out. She slowed instantly, not startled, not scared, but alert. Her eyes scanned their faces, then the pipe in Derek's hand. "You really want to do this again?" she asked. "No," Derek said, voice trembling with anger. "I want to end it." He swung the pipe. She moved before the sound reached her ears. The blow sliced through empty air as she ducked, grabbing his wrist and twisting the weapon free. The motion was fluid, almost graceful. She could have disarmed him in one move, but Chase rushed in from behind, and instinct took over. Her knee came up, striking Chase in the ribs. The air whooshed out of him as he collapsed. Derek tried again, throwing a desperate punch. She blocked it easily, then slammed her forearm into his chest, sending him sprawling into the dirt. "Stay down," she warned, breathing hard. But Derek, humiliated beyond reason, lunged again, and this time he caught her off guard. The two tumbled dangerously, close to the cliff's edge. Gravel slid beneath their feet, and for a terrifying second, Alyssa felt the ground give way. Her mind flashed back. Sand instead of soil, Afghanistan instead of California. A man's scream, a hand slipping from hers into the void. "Marcus," she roared, twisting out of Derek's grip and rolling clear, just as the dirt gave way where they'd struggled. A chunk of earth tumbled into the roaring sea below. Derek froze, staring down at the drop. The color drained from his face. "You almost died?" she said. "Yeah, you almost did." The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Sheriff Hayes had arrived, thanks to a single phone call from Milo. He appeared moments later, soaked, gun drawn. Everyone freeze. Derek dropped the pipe and raised his hands, shaking. Chase groaned from where he'd fallen. Elisa stood still, hands at her sides, breathing steady but eyes distant, still halfway between now and the war she'd left behind. Hayes lowered his weapon slowly. "Alyssa, you okay?" She nodded. "Physically." He turned to Derek. "You're under arrest. Assault with a deadly weapon, trespassing, and stupidity in the first degree." Derek didn't resist this time. His fight was gone. As Hayes cuffed him, he muttered, "She's crazy. She almost killed me." Hayes shot him a glare. "No, son." She stopped herself from doing what any sane person would have done. "You should thank her for that." As the squad car pulled away, Alyssa stood by the cliff's edge, staring at the broken earth where they'd fought. Hayes walked up beside her. "You did the right thing," he said. She shook her head slowly. "That's what scares me. It didn't feel like the right thing. It felt like survival." He studied her face. "That's all any of us ever do." The wind blew her hair across her face, and she looked out over the vast gray ocean. "I thought I left that part of me behind," she murmured. "But it's still there. The training, the instinct, the part that doesn't hesitate." Hayes put a hand on her shoulder. "You can't erase who you were, Alyssa. But you can decide what you'll be now." She didn't answer. Instead, she crouched, picked up a handful of dirt, and let it slip through her fingers, one grain at a time. "Then I decide," she said quietly. "This ends here." Later that night, she walked the pier again. The waves reflected the orange glow of the lamps, and the town slept peacefully, unaware of how close it had come to tragedy. Milo appeared again, hesitant. "They're gone," he said. "They're not coming back." Hayes made sure of it. Elisa nodded. "Good. I told him everything," Milo added. "I figured you'd rather me say it than them twist it. I appreciate that." He shifted awkwardly. "You saved them, you know. They'll never admit it, but you did." She looked out over the dark water. "They'll learn. Or they won't, but I'm done teaching." As she walked home, the sea wind carried the faint sound of laughter from somewhere down the boardwalk. Children, free, unafraid. For the first time in days, she smiled. She wasn't free of her past, not yet. But she'd drawn a line, and she'd stood her ground. And for someone who'd spent years fighting wars that never truly ended, that was victory enough. The days after Derek's arrest passed with a strange, uneasy calm. Crescent Bay went back to its quiet rhythm, fishing boats humming at dawn, children biking along the boardwalk, tourists snapping photos of sunsets that looked like painted fire. For most of the town, the storm had passed. For Alyssa Carter, it had only settled inside her. Every morning she still rose at 5:30, the way she had in the Navy, out of habit more than purpose. She'd jog along the cliffs, breathing the cold air, watching the ocean stretch endlessly before her. But something was different now. The peace she once drew from the sea no longer filled her. It haunted her. Every crash of the waves sounded like the thunder of distant explosions. Every gust of wind reminded her of the sandstorms that swallowed entire outposts in Afghanistan. Even the smell of salt sometimes carried with it a memory of gunpowder. Peace, she realized, could be heavy too. Heavier, sometimes, than war. At the local cafe, people whispered. They always did after something wild happened in Crescent Bay. "That's her," one woman murmured to another, nodding toward the window where Alyssa sat alone with her coffee. "You mean the Navy lady?" "Yeah, the one who took down those boys by herself. I heard she broke one of their ribs." "Really?" "I heard she didn't even touch them. Just scared them with her eyes." Alyssa pretended not to hear. The whispers rolled off her like waves against rock, familiar, constant, and meaningless. She wasn't angry. She just didn't want to be anyone's story. When Sheriff Hayes walked in, the whispers stopped. He ordered his usual black coffee, no sugar, and sat across from her. "You're avoiding me," he said with a wry smile. "I'm avoiding everyone," she replied. He studied her face. "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The one soldiers get when they win a battle but lose sleep." She took a slow sip. "I'm fine, Sheriff." "Sure," he said quietly. "And I'm the president." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Hayes had seen it before, the aftermath, the quiet destruction that followed survival. "You ever think," Alyssa said finally, "that maybe peace isn't made for people like us?" He leaned back. "You mean people who've seen too much?" She nodded. He took a slow breath. "Peace isn't something that's made for you. It's something you make yourself, Alyssa. One day, one choice at a time." She looked out the window. A group of kids were laughing, chasing each other down the boardwalk, their voices bright against the ocean wind. For a second, she envied them. Then, for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to smile, small, hesitant, but real. That night, the town held its annual Founders Festival. Lanterns strung across Main Street, music spilling from open doors, the smell of grilled food and sea salt blending in the air. Alyssa hadn't planned to go, but Hayes had insisted. "You need to be around people again," he'd said. "Not ghosts." So she went. She kept to the edges, watching. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all felt like another world. She could almost pretend she was just another face in the crowd. But part of her was always elsewhere, alert, scanning for exits, tracking movements, a soldier in peacetime camouflage. Then she saw him, Milo. He was helping set up a booth near the stage, wearing a faded gray hoodie and a nervous smile. When he noticed her, his expression shifted, surprise, then guilt, then relief. "Miss Carter," he said softly when he approached. "Milo," she greeted. "You working?" He nodded. "Community service. Sheriff's idea. Said I should do something good for once." Alyssa smiled faintly. "He's not wrong. I just wanted to say, thank you," he said. "For not, breaking my neck that night." She chuckled quietly. "You were the only one smart enough to walk away." He shuffled awkwardly. The others, Chase left town. Derek's still locked up. Guess things change fast when you mess with the wrong person. Alyssa's eyes softened. "You didn't mess with the wrong person. You just made a mistake." He nodded, ashamed. "Still, I'm sorry. For everything." "Apology accepted," she said simply. It wasn't forgiveness out of pity. It was recognition. She knew what guilt looked like, what it did to people. And she knew that some burdens didn't need to be carried forever. As the night wore on, fireworks bloomed above the bay, their reflections dancing across the water. The crowd cheered, faces turned upward, eyes wide with wonder. Alyssa stood apart, watching the colors burst and fade. Every explosion lit up fragments of her memory. Flares over desert skies, tracer rounds cutting through night, brothers in arms who never came home. But alongside those flashes came something else, the laughter of children, the hum of life, the warmth of a world that hadn't completely broken. For the first time, the sounds of fireworks didn't make her flinch. She closed her eyes and let herself breathe it in. The next morning, she returned to the cliffs. The sky was pale gold, the sea calm. She stood at the edge where she had fought Derek days before. The ground still bore the scars of that struggle. Torn grass, broken dirt, a mark of violence in an otherwise peaceful landscape. She crouched, brushing her fingers across the earth. "You can't erase it," she whispered to herself. "But you can choose what grows here next." Then she did something simple. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a small packet of wildflower seeds she'd bought at the festival, and scattered them across the soil. The gesture was quiet, almost ceremonial. A way of saying this is done. Over the next few weeks, Alyssa began to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small ways that only those who really paid attention could see. She started volunteering at the youth center, fixing old equipment, teaching self-defense classes, showing kids how to respect strength instead of abusing it. Word spread quickly, the Navy ladies training the teens. But she didn't care about the talk. What mattered was the look on the kids' faces when they realized they didn't need to fight to be powerful. One afternoon, Milo showed up. "Heard you needed help," he said. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready to take orders from me again?" He grinned sheepishly. "As long as you don't throw me this time." She laughed. It felt good, unexpected, unforced. As they trained side by side, Hayes watched from a distance, arms crossed, smiling to himself. The town had gotten something back, and so had she. Weeks later, the first wildflowers began to bloom along the cliffs. Tiny bursts of color against the gray rock and green grass. Alyssa stood there one evening, hands in her pockets, wind tugging at her hair. She thought of everything. The push, the fight, the choices she made not out of anger, but survival. For once, she didn't feel haunted. Peace hadn't come to her. She had gone out and made it herself, piece by piece, scar by scar. And in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the ocean whispered its endless rhythm, Alyssa Carter, former Navy SEAL, survivor, fighter, and finally, human being, felt something she hadn't in years. Not just calm, not just safety, but peace that didn't weigh her down anymore. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds, painting golden bars across the hardwood floor of Alyssa's small coastal house. The rhythmic crash of waves outside had become her favorite alarm clock, steady, dependable, and alive. It had been 6 months since the incident on the cliffs. The town had moved on, and so had she, or at least she was trying to. The self-defense classes she taught every Tuesday at the community center were full now, attended by everyone from teenage girls to local fishermen who wanted to stay sharp. The room always echoed with laughter, shouts, and the slap of bare feet on the mats. For Alyssa, that sound was healing. She stood before the class, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and training pants, her voice calm but firm. Remember, strength isn't about hitting hard. It's about standing your ground when fear tells you to run. The students listened closely. They admired her not just for her skill, but for the quiet authority that came with it. She didn't boast about being a Navy SEAL. She didn't need to. The way she carried herself said everything. After class, as she was putting away the training gear, she noticed Milo waiting by the door. "Hey, Coach," he said, smiling awkwardly. "Coach?" She teased. Since when am I a coach? He shrugged. Since you started teaching us how not to get our butts kicked. She smirked. Fair enough. Milo had changed. The boy who once followed bullies now helped guide younger kids away from trouble. He volunteered at the center, repaired broken equipment, even tutored a few kids who struggled in school. Elisa saw in him something rare, redemption that actually stuck. You've done good, Milo, she said as they walked outside into the late afternoon sun. You turned things around. He looked out toward the sea, his voice quiet. You showed me I could. That evening, Alyssa sat on the porch of her cottage overlooking the cliffs. The wildflowers she had planted months earlier swayed in the breeze, bright and alive. She sipped her coffee and watched the sky fade from gold to purple. A knock came at the door. When she opened it, Sheriff Hayes stood there, holding a thin file. He looked more serious than usual. Evening, he said. You look like bad news, she replied, stepping aside. Maybe. Mind if I come in? Sure. He set the file on her kitchen table and opened it. Inside were a few photographs, grainy shots of an old van, license plates, and a storage unit. Recognize any of this? He asked. Alyssa studied them. No, what am I looking at? Something came up last night, Hayes said. Remember Derek? The ringleader from your incident? She nodded slowly. Well, he's out on bail. And last night, a local fisherman reported seeing him and two other men out near the old docks. They've been asking questions about you. Elisa's jaw tightened. About me? Hayes nodded. Word is, they think you ruined their lives. They might be planning something stupid. Silence settled between them, heavy as the sea air. Do I need to worry? She asked finally. Probably not, Hayes said. But I wanted you to know. Alyssa leaned back, arms crossed. They never learn, do they? People like that rarely do, Hayes said grimly. But this time, I'll make sure they don't get close. She nodded. Appreciate it. When he left, she stood by the window, looking out into the darkening night. For a long time she listened, to the wind, the waves, and the low hum of the world outside. Old instincts flickered awake inside her, sharp and electric. The next night, she couldn't sleep. She went for a run along the cliffs, her flashlight cutting a thin white path through the mist. The ocean roared below, relentless and eternal. Halfway through, she noticed something. Tire tracks in the dirt near the edge of the cliff road. Fresh ones. Her heart slowed, focus narrowing like it always did in combat. She crouched, tracing the marks with her fingers. There were 3 sets of footprints, all leading toward the overlook, and none coming back. Then she heard it, the faint click of gravel behind her. Evening, Carter, a voice said, rough and familiar. She turned slowly. Derek stood there, face half lit by moonlight, his eyes cold and furious. 2 men stood beside him, shadows shifting in the dark. You ruined my life, he hissed. You ruined your own, she replied calmly. You think you can just humiliate me and walk away? He growled. Alyssa took a step closer, her stance measured, ready. Walk away, Derek. This isn't the fight you think it is. He sneered. You think you scare me? No, she said softly. But you should. He lunged first, clumsy, angry, and blind. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to throw him to the ground. The second man rushed her. She kicked out his knee, dropped low, and twisted his arm until she heard the pop of a joint dislocating. The third froze, then ran. Derek struggled to his feet, panting. You think you're better than us? Elisa's voice was low but steady. No, just smarter. He swung wildly again. She ducked, spun, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, gasping. She stepped over him, her voice almost a whisper. "You came here for revenge," she said. "I came here for peace. And now I'm done running from your kind of noise." He glared up at her. "You think you can keep hiding behind your badge friends and war stories?" "I'm not hiding," she said. "I'm healing." She turned and started walking away. "Hey!" he shouted, grabbing a rock. He raised it, but before he could throw, a beam of light hit his face. Sheriff Hayes stepped out from the dark, flashlight steady, voice hard. "Drop it, Derek." For a moment, Derek froze. Then the rock fell. Hayes cuffed him without a word. The other injured man groaned nearby, clutching his arm. Elisa exhaled slowly, her adrenaline finally ebbing. "You followed me." "I told you I wouldn't let them near you," Hayes said. "You're part of this town now, Carter. We look after our own." Back at her house, Alyssa sat on the porch steps as the first hints of dawn colored the horizon. The sheriff had gone, and men were in custody again, and the cliffs were quiet once more. But this time, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. She thought about how far she'd come, from the haunted veteran who couldn't breathe without remembering gunfire, to the woman who now taught others to stand their ground. Her past hadn't disappeared. It had simply stopped defining her. She looked out over the waves, their endless rhythm whispering to her like an old friend. "Echoes of the sea," she murmured. "Always there, but never the same twice." She smiled, a real smile this time, and closed her eyes. The ocean roared. The wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. And for once, Alyssa Carter wasn't bracing for the next battle. She was simply alive. And that, she realized, was its own kind of victory. The sun rose slowly over Crescent Bay, gilding the harbor in warm gold. The town had settled into its quiet rhythm once more. Boats drifted lazily along the docks, and the gulls wheeled overhead, squawking their morning greetings. Alyssa Carter walked along the pier, her hands tucked into the pockets of her hoodie. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, calm and infinite. She had grown used to this stillness, the kind that didn't demand action, didn't threaten, didn't call her to fight. Yet she walked as though expecting the unexpected, because she had learned that peace was earned, never given. The training center was alive again with laughter, the mat echoing with the slap of hands and feet. Elisa watched the students carefully, correcting posture, demonstrating moves, and smiling at small victories. She had come to love these moments, teaching not just defense, but confidence, patience, and discipline. Milo worked alongside her, assisting the younger kids. He had grown into a confident young man, his guilt replaced by responsibility. Watching him, Alyssa felt a rare warmth, a tangible result of teaching someone to rise above mistakes. "Miss Carter," a young girl said timidly, "what if someone bigger than me tries to hurt me?" Alyssa knelt to meet her gaze. "Then you remember what we've practiced. You stay calm, you protect yourself, and you never let fear control you. Strength isn't about size. It's about being ready and knowing your limits." The girl nodded, and Alyssa smiled. Teaching these lessons, seeing them understood, had become her form of therapy. Later, when the students left, Alyssa remained behind, picking up the scattered equipment. She paused, leaning on the mat and letting her eyes drift toward the setting sun outside the window. The peace she had fought for was fragile, she knew. One wrong move, one person with a grudge, and it could all vanish in seconds. But she had learned to trust herself, to trust her instincts, and more importantly, to trust her choices. A sound behind her made her spin. It was Milo, holding a small notebook. "I found something," he said hesitantly. She raised an eyebrow. "What now?" He opened it to a page filled with notes. "You've inspired others. Kids, adults. Even some of the fishermen. They've been talking about self-defense, about standing up without being violent. Some want classes. Others just want to be better. Elisa blinked, touched. You did all this? Not me, he said. You led. I just helped a little. Her throat tightened. For the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with combat or survival. That night, the wind carried a hint of storm, but not danger. Elisa walked along the cliffs again, her boots crunching on gravel. The wildflower she had planted months ago swayed in the wind, resilient against the elements. She stopped at the edge, looking down at the black waves below. Memories rose unbidden. Afghanistan, the desert, Marcus, the chaos she had survived. But this time, she didn't flinch. She realized that every battle she had fought, every shove, every attack, every split-second decision had led her to this moment. Not to victory in combat, but victory over fear, over doubt, over the haunting echoes of her past. And then she saw it, a small figure at the base of the cliff trail. Milo had followed her, keeping a careful distance. You okay? He asked. I am, she said softly. Better than I've been in years. He nodded. You saved a lot of people, you know. Not just yourself. She smiled faintly. Sometimes saving yourself is the first lesson. Everything else follows. As the weeks passed, Elisa became something of a quiet legend in Crescent Bay. People whispered stories of the woman who had stopped 3 men with nothing but skill and calm, who had returned to teach self-defense instead of seeking revenge, who carried the weight of her past with grace instead of letting it crush her. But Elisa didn't care about the legend. She cared about the work, about the small victories, a child standing taller, a teen walking away from trouble, Milo learning that strength without control was nothing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stood on the pier, watching the lights of the town reflect in the water. Hayes joined her, coffee in hand. Another quiet night, he said. Yes, she replied. Do you ever think about leaving? She shook her head. This is home now. My peace isn't in running. It's in staying, in making a difference where I can. Hayes nodded. Good answer. She watched the waves, letting them wash over her in memory and presence. I've learned something, she said. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's knowing you can handle it when it comes. And sometimes it's teaching others to handle it too. The next morning brought a clear sky. Elisa jogged along the cliffs, feeling the wind in her hair and the sun on her face. She stopped to look at the ocean, now calm and infinite. She thought about Derek, Chase, and the mistakes they had made. They had learned the hard way that the wrong person could be deadly, that arrogance could be punished without cruelty. But she also thought about Milo, the students, and the town. She realized that impact wasn't measured in pain inflicted, but lives influenced, lessons taught, and fear transformed into knowledge. The ocean whispered to her as it always did, and for the first time in years, she truly felt free. Elisa returned home, passing the wildflowers she had planted, now in full bloom along the cliffs. She knelt, brushing her fingers over the petals. Life, fragile and persistent, had won. Her phone buzzed, a message from Milo. Class tomorrow? We're ready for more lessons. She smiled. Always. As night fell, she stood once more on the pier, listening to the waves. The town slept, safe. The sea roared eternal. And Elisa Carter, Navy SEAL, survivor, teacher, and warrior, finally let herself breathe fully. She had faced violence, danger, and fear, and survived. But the greatest lesson, she realized, was not about fighting. It was about living. The cliffs, the ocean, the town, all bore witness to her journey. And in that quiet, radiant night, Elisa Carter knew one final truth. She had earned peace. Not the kind granted by circumstance. Not the kind that comes and goes. The kind you make with your own hands. And that peace, steady, eternal, earned, was hers.